Hi there, welcome to I'll Knit If I Want To. I'm Andrea Mowry of Drea Renee Knits, and this is a little weekly podcast where I try my best to answer some of your questions. Today I am wearing my Inclinations cowl. This is knit up in two colorways from Spin Cycle Dyed in the Wool, and there we go. That's what I'm wearing. I have a new pattern coming out next week, so definitely stay tuned for that. I'm really excited. I knit two different versions, and I've already been wearing them out and about. And I'm really excited. So if you are not already subscribed, I recommend subscribing to my newsletter because that is the place to get a little special discount when I release a new pattern. And you'll also be the first to know when it's live. All right, let's go ahead and jump into this week's questions. This first one is a longer question and it's about knitting style. Continental versus English versus whatever the heck I do. I learned to knit from my grandmother and dad, and as family knowledge goes, we knit continental. But I've been told it's an Eastern European style, not what is currently considered continental. I hold my yarn in the left hand, but knit through the back loop and purl where you just grab the yarn as it stands rather than wrap from in front to over the needle. When I started knitting again a few years ago, I basically had to teach myself how to knit continental in order to follow pattern directions. And even so, I frequently reverted to the old purl style, which makes an interesting pattern when done deliberately, but a little weird in a cardigan. I finally knit enough to break the habit, but the problem is my purl stitches are impossible to keep nice tension in. No matter how hard I try, I basically row out every time and it looks terrible, as well as destroying my overall gauge. I can knit English slowly and only if I'm forced to for color work, but I don't know that switching to English is the solution. I just frogged an entire fingering weight sweater body because the gauge was close, basically because the gauge was off. I'm swatching again, and in frustration, I switched back to my old style, and magically it looks perfect. Lovely even stitches, nice amount of bounce, a fabric I'd like to wear and show off. So finally, my question. Am I the only one? Are there other knitters in this style? Am I a secret third thing? I'm wondering if it's worth reverse engineering every stitch, increase, decrease, lace, in order to use my own personal style of knitting. Just wondering if you've encountered this with your teaching or in the community. So, such a great question. When you described it to me, my first thoughts were, it sounds like you're a combination knitter. So I love combination knitting for ribbing because it actually really helps keep the purls and the knits using up a similar amount of yarn, so they're more even. So it tends to tidy up our ribbing really nice. So if you're like, what's combination knitting? Combination knitting, the way I understand it, I also think that there's two different things we call combination knitting. So I'm only going to talk about the one. And basically what it means is that we wrap the yarn under to purl instead of over the top. And by wrapping it under, it has less of a distance to travel. And so you use a little less yarn when you purl. And that helps even out how much yarn we're using and ends up creating nicer ribbing. It's also probably why when you do it that way, your purls aren't too big and so they're better balanced with your knits and you don't row out. When you then try to purl the other way, your purl stitches are getting stretched out bigger than you would like them, and that's why you're rowing out, is what it sounds like to me. The other thing I think is happening is when you described your purling method, if I understood it correctly, it sounded like you continue to hold your yarn in back right where it is. So it sounded like that's what the difference was. You don't push it forward between your needles like many other people might bring the yarn forward, work their purl, and then they keep the yarn in back to work their knit. So that style of purling is what I learned is called Norwegian purling. And I actually think it's a great way to purl, especially for people who are going from English to continental and trying to learn. It's quite intuitive. And I've had continental teachers tell me that it's a really successful way to teach English knitters how to knit continental. There's nothing wrong with that kind of purling. Basically, I think all that's happening is you must do something a little bit differently, which without seeing it is hard for me to know, but I think you're basically doing a Norwegian purl, but somehow instead of having the yarn go over when you go to purl, it's going under, and that twists your stitch, which is why you then have to work your knits through the back loop, because then that would untwist them. So that is what I think is happening. I would love, love, love if there are others of you out there who are like, oh, I know exactly what she's doing. This is what's going on. Now, the real question is, I don't think you're the other one. I think everything you're doing, plenty of people do. The tricky part is what you said about reverse engineering, increasing and decreasing and things like that. Yeah. I was going to make a bold statement and I caught myself because I realized it wasn't fully true. So that's the tricky part. And I have thought about that because I have had people tell me after trying combination knitting for their ribbing, they love it. It tightens everything. It just like, not tightens everything up, but what do I want to say? Polishes everything up. I don't know. We're going to go with that. It just makes everything look so much tidier. And so they love it. And they realize that it helps in other areas where they were having some purling tension issues. And so they want to do that all the time. And I have definitely knit patterns where I'm in such a good rhythm with that kind of purl that I stick with it throughout the pattern. But you're right. Shaping is where it gets a little tricky because some of your stitches are twisted from doing that wrap, and also going under instead of over can have an effect on however you're trying to manipulate the next action you're going to do to create either an increase, a decrease, lace, etc. And I wish I had more guidance there, because that I'm still pretty new to it and kind of on my own journey with it myself. So I don't have a ton of input to be able to offer a lot of advice, except for if it were me, I think I would attempt to figure it out, even if, because if you're thinking about, I want to knit a sweater and most of the sweater is stockinette, let's say, and you're knitting a cardigan or a pullover, whatever it is. Well, how much in there are you really having to reverse engineer? So if it's kind of a great wardrobe staple piece, it might just be some sleeve decreases or increases and then some yoke shaping up top. So if you can figure out a basic way to work your knit two together, your slip, slip, knit, purl two together, etc., and then maybe you're like, I don't think you would necessarily need to do anything different for a make one right, make one left. You can also sometimes swap in and out increases and decreases for each other. The main thing that you have to keep in mind is if they have to lean in a certain direction and if that affects the pattern. And then as far as especially increasing goes, you need to know, okay, am I increasing in an existing stitch or am I increasing into a space between stitches? Because you can't swap those evenly. So that would take a little forethought. But I'm just wondering if you find a few increases and decreases that work really well with you, they look correct, then maybe it wouldn't be so hard to plug those in where you need them in patterns. Obviously, when it comes to lace and things like that, it might get a little trickier. But personally, I want you to be able to knit in the style that feels so good to you and that is giving you this fabric you love. That I would love to see you stick with that. And then if you can grab, figure out a few more tools to put into that toolkit to make it work for you, that's what I would want to do. I also was curious, do your dad or grandma, do they have any tips they could share with shaping to help you through that? But if anybody else, if you're like, oh, this person's describing how I knit, please chime in. That would be so great. Okay. The next question is about blocking hats on balloons. So back in the day, every once in a while, I would actually use a balloon to block out the crown of my hat. And so this person was questioning that. Can you tell us how to do that? I tried to block my traveler hat on a balloon and failed miserably. I usually block hats flat, but thought with its shaping, this one would like a balloon better. Unfortunately, when I tried to put the wet floppy hat over the inflated balloon, it didn't go well. It slid everywhere and I couldn't get it straight. Maybe I blew up the balloon too big? I ended up blocking the hat flat and that was fine, but I think it would have been more crisp in 3D. So basically, I don't really do the balloon method anymore. I do think it's a fun one to try for sure. Generally speaking, I don't have any balloons hanging around. For a while we would have like leftover balloons from parties or something. But if I were to do it, what I like to do is I blow up the balloon only a little bit, you know, like the size of a softball. And then I put that into my damp hat. Also make sure your hat's not like sopping wet still. I mean, it should be as dry as you can get it by squeezing it between your towels. And then with the balloon inside the hat, I would finish blowing it up to about my head size or the head size of the intended recipient. And maybe even a little smaller. The thing about hats is generally we want them to have some negative ease. When we put them on our head, unless we were trying to make a slouchy hat, we want them to stretch a little bit and fit our head snugly. We don't want them to be super floppy. So even when I'm trying to go for a slouchier look, I'm very careful about the brim because I don't want the whole thing to be slouchy. I only want the body of the hat. I want that brim to still fit really nice and snug on me. So I'm really careful about that. But yeah, then I just blow it up probably a little bit smaller than my own head, and then I just leave it to dry. For the traveler hat, I actually do recommend blocking that flat. I had a friend ask that during the knit along challenge. I was like, you know what? Because it has these hard seams in it, it's actually perfect for blocking flat. It actually creates, I held them up. If you go back to a few episodes around the time of the knit along, I actually held them up because I think that they dry so nice. Like they look so nice as a flat lay. So I dried all mine flat, and I didn't fold up the brim until after they were dry. It helps that brim dry better because when it's double fabric, it's gonna stay damp longer. And again, it helped not stretch out the brim because I really like a snug brim on my hats. And I mentioned that in the pattern, but anyways, that's how I do it. If you want to give it a try, is basically I put a partially inflated balloon inside the hat and then blow it up while the hat's there. That way you aren't doing that wrestling game. I can so picture what you were saying. So I don't want to wrestle with it. And I also, again, I don't want to overstretch my hat. So I don't want to have to pull it over the widest part of the balloon. And then when you're ready to get it out, you can just put a needle into the balloon and let the air out and take the balloon out. Okay, oh my gosh, I'm yawning. Oh, I apologize. Excuse me. It's a little overcast here today, and it's like making me feel really cozy. I'm like, oh, I feel snuggly. I would like a hot beverage and my knitting now, please. I think I might do that when I'm done here. I am about ready for some coffee. It's coffee o'clock. Okay, next question. I've been knitting Broom in a sport held with mohair. So Broom is the sweater I released last month. Well, actually 2 months ago now, because we are in June now. So that was my April release, and it is a high neck raglan pullover. My problem is that the neck is way tighter than your pattern shows, and I'm not sure I'll be able to stand it that close to my skin. I must confess, I didn't cast on with the Twisted German cast on as I could not figure out how to do it. So I did a long tail cast on instead, hoping it would be loose enough, as I realized it would need to be for the neckline to be wide. Sadly, it's not. My question is, do you think blocking and stretching it will do the trick, or do I need to rip it back from the top and down past where it has been caught for the double over? Okay, so a couple of things here. Really, one thing. Lied. So I think the most important thing to consider is it your cast on that's too tight, or in general, is your ribbing for the neck looking too snug? Because If it's not a cast on issue and it's more you're worried about how snug that ribbing's looking, I would attempt to at least steam block it and see how much it'll open up. Because it could open up, you know, before blocking, it can look like a little guy. If it's a long tail cast on, not if it's a long tail cast on, if it's a too tight cast on, you can't stretch it. Like there, it only has so much give. There's only so much yarn. Our cast-ons and our bind-offs tend to be pretty stable, and they're not going to have a lot of stretch to them. You can certainly try. I mean, you can test it just by putting your hand in there and seeing how much give does it have. Like I would even throw it on and kind of do one of these and just see how much give it has, and that's going to guide you in what you should do here. So if it is just like, then it's probably the cast on is too tight, and the only solution is to take out that cast on. It's happened to me before. You gotta really be careful with those cast ons for the doubled collar. But if it does feel like, oh no, there's give there, it's just when it's not blocked, it's sitting on your neck, I would definitely try blocking before tearing it out. And just a little caution, if you do choose to tear it out, it sounds like you want to try and go from cast on down. Just be where it's a little tricky going in that direction because you're going against the way you knit. So you're not tearing back up, you know, you're going down into your knitting instead of just unraveling it the way it was done. So just to be aware, it can be done. I've done it. It's just a little finicky. So have some lovely relaxing music playing, have some good lighting, and just roll those shoulders back. You'll do great. Okay, I have gotten this question a lot, so I wanted to answer it today. I've been knitting with a single ply wool sport weight yarn lately, and I was wondering if it's possible for me to spin 2 plies together with a drop spindle to create a heavier weight yarn. So the question I've gotten so frequently is, can I ply together 2 like ready spun yarns? And sure, give it a go. One thing about those single ply yarns is they are generally made in a way where they're made not to be plied. They should be fairly balanced just as they come. So you won't need a ton of twist in there. If you put too much ply twist, what's going to happen is it's going to unbalance the yarn. So that's something to consider. But I think if it sounds fun and you want to try it, just do a little sample and see what you think and knit up a swatch. I will say, I don't think it's necessary. I think it's adding an extra step, getting you from yarn to whatever you want to knit that you just don't need to do. Holding those strands together. I have held strands together many, many, many times to knit something and have never found it necessary that they be plied to get what I want from it. But if it sounds fun, go for it. I think at the very least, sample it out and see what you think. So grab, you know, 2 little balls, ply them together on your drop spindle, wash it, let it dry, cake it up into a swatch, and just see what you think. If you really want to have some fun, I would recommend even then doing a swatch where you just hold the 2 strands together and don't ply them, and then compare the 2 and see what you like better. Because that'll really tell you, is it worth it? And maybe it is. But I would check it out that way and see what you think. All right, the last question for today is about the weekender light. I've swatched, measured, and settled on a needle size. I'm wondering if you had any advice on how I translate changes in my swatch pre and post blocking to show, to how the actual larger garment will change. I'm using a superwash wool and it grew a full 3/4 of an inch in the swatch. Will my garment also grow 3/4 of an inch, or should I expect more growth based on the weight of an entire sweater? Sorry, I got so thirsty. Okay. Your finished sweater will grow more than your swatch. I don't know how big your swatch is, but it's definitely helped. So why I like to take a pre and a post blocking measurement of my swatch is so that I know I am staying on the gauge I think I am while knitting my sweater. So if I only have what the gauge was after I washed my swatch, it's harder for me to determine, okay, am I still matching up what was in my swatch before I've washed my sweater? By having both measurements, you can make sure you're being consistent. But a swatch can only tell us so much depending on how big we've knit it, because the more we knit, the heavier it becomes. And yes, gravity is going to play more of a role, especially over time and especially with a superwash yarn. So I would say it's safe to assume it is going to grow more than 3/4 of an inch. So what I would recommend is sometimes it's like, what happened between here and here? It's like I start thinking in my head, and I'm just like, I'm like, oh yeah, say it out loud, Andrea. Okay, so now I lost it. It's gonna come back. Here's what I would do, because it is a bottom-up sweater, and I think that's your concern is, okay, I want to know how much this is going to grow because I'm not knitting it from the top down. It's a little trickier to change length after the fact when we are doing it from the bottom up. So what I would do is, there's no reason why you can't block or steam block a partially knit sweater so that you really know. I mean, let that sweater be a giant swatch as you go. So what I would do is, for that sweater, it has slimmer sleeves. The underarm doesn't hang super low between your actual underarm, unless you're trying to knit it really oversized. So I would hold it up to about 1 to 2 inches under my underarm crevice here, and I would hold up the body before continuing on to the yoke. And before you do this, you can give it a steam block or a wet block so that you can see how much growth there is and make sure you like that length. I would repeat that once you have finished the yoke before you do the 3-needle bind off. So once you have your shoulders knit to the point where you're about to do your 3-needle bind off and your neck bind off, I would go ahead and I would take some locking stitch markers and I would lock the area of the shoulder together. It's going to be a little loose, so it's going to tighten up. It's going to bring it up, half an inch, a centimeter, maybe, once you've actually done the bind off. But that way you can try it on and be like, okay, I like this length, because that is going to be a lot easier to go ahead and tear back at that point to add or remove some length than if now you've already attached your sleeves or already done the 3-needle bind off. So those are the places I would go ahead and check that sweater. But again, what I like to use the pre and post blocking measurements in my swatch for is to make sure that I'm staying consistent with what my swatch was as I'm knitting. So if I know that my swatch before I blocked it was sitting at 5 stitches per inch, but so that was pre-blocking, sorry. So pre-blocking it's sitting at, let's say, 5 stitches per inch, but I know it's gonna grow after and it goes up to 4 stitches per inch or something. While I'm knitting, I need to match that 5 stitches because it's before I've blocked the sweater. So hopefully that makes sense. That's kind of how I like to use a pre-blocked gauge. You can also, if you are really concerned about it, you could also knit a bigger swatch. You can even, some people will hang it to dry to see, okay, am I getting even more growth? Because that's going to better mimic how it might play out in the actual finished sweater as gravity takes effect. So you could also do that. You can use like clothespins, clip it to a hanger. Some people will even weight it a little. I haven't done that. That seems aggressive to me, but maybe to each their own. Okay. We are good with all of our questions. There we go. I I've got nothing else. We did wrap March to May. I'm waiting to hear back from 2 of the winners. 2 of the winners have not checked their messages. But winners have been picked. You guys made so many amazing sweaters and shawls. There was over 700 just in the Ravelry forums. That doesn't even include all the ones that I got to look through on Instagram. So really, really amazing. You should all be so proud of yourselves. I do have a special little newsletter I'm going to send up as a wrap up for that. I'm just hoping to hear from those other prize winners before that one goes out. But as I said, there's a new sweater coming next week, and I can't wait to show it with you, for you. Okay, go get that coffee now. I hope that you have such a great weekend, and then I get to see you back here next week. Bye.